Your IEEE membership means access to insurance products featuring exclusive group rates, flexible benefit options, and portable coverage that stays with you throughout your career. Engineered to help protect your loved ones and your financial security. For more information, go to IEEEinsurance.com.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our IEEE-USA webinar, Re-Entering the Workforce, in partnership with IEEE Women in Engineering. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. We're grateful to our sponsor, the IEEE Member Group Insurance Program, powered by AMBA, for supporting today's event. Please note that this webinar is not affiliated with or endorsed by our sponsor. Our presenter for today is IEEE Senior Member and Eta Kappa Nu Honor Society member, Jill Gostin. Jill is a Principal Research Scientist in the Software, Engineering, and Architecture Division, or SEED, of Georgia Tech Research Institute's Sensors and Electromagnetic Applications Lab. She's currently the Systems Engineering, Integration, and Test Lead in SEED. Previously, she served as Deputy Director for the Information and Communications Lab. She's worked at GTRI since 1985, including 12 years of part-time work as needed. Her work is focused on systems engineering, open architectures, algorithm assessment, and software testing and evaluation for sensor systems. In 2016, she was named the Georgia Woman in Technology Woman of the Year, which recognizes women technology executives in the state of Georgia for their accomplishments as leaders in business, as visionaries of technology, and as women who make a difference in their community. Jill previously served as the IEEE Vice President for Member and Geographic Activities, or MGA, in 2023, chairing the IEEE MGA Board. She's currently serving as the past chair of the IEEE MGA Board and is a past IEEE Region 3 Director. Her IEEE service has included multiple roles across IEEE, including on the boards of governors of the Computer Society and the Aerospace and Electronic Systems Society, and in several leadership roles on the Sensors Council. Without further ado, I'll now pass off to our presenter. Welcome, Jill. We're very excited for what you have in store for our audience today.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here. And hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining me here today to talk about re-entering the workforce. This is not a new problem. In fact, in many cases, it's actually a little bit easier now than it used to be due to the COVID pandemic and its impact on how we all work. And we'll talk about that later in the presentation. I actually have personal experience myself of returning to work after a long break, what was essentially a 12-year break. But everyone's experience is different lengths of time, different things they did. And we'll talk about some of those differences and the challenges they present. The bottom line up front, though, is that returning to the workforce after a gap can be and has been done by many people, but preparation is key. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about this? As you can see here in the US, 68% of workers have had a gap in their employment of multiple months or of years. I also found some worldwide statistics from a LinkedIn survey of over 20,000 global workers, and it showed about the same number. About 66% have had some form of a career break or a resume gap. And in fact, I think that survey is what led LinkedIn to change what they display on their page. There's now an option to include a career break on your LinkedIn page. It's a feature where you can show your skills and experiences that you gained during that break. But while these breaks and gaps, they occur globally, each country handles them differently. And so they may be different where you are. This is especially seen in maternity and paternity leave. You know, for maternity leave, most countries offer like 10 to 20 weeks. I think the average is like 16 weeks is the global average for a maternity leave, but some are significantly higher than that. And many countries also pay during that leave. In the US, you're offered only a few weeks of unpaid leave. That's what's mandatory, but there are, of course, some companies in the US that provide more than what is required. But there's also many countries that offer some form of paid paternity leave. So all of these different types of breaks can be handled differently in different countries, but the approach that we're going to talk about is going to cover any of these instances. to help you get back to work. Many hiring managers see employment gaps as a red flag. So I put a red flag on this slide. It's not as big of a problem as I said as it used to be because the COVID pandemic. It changed how many of those hiring managers look at gaps. Some of them know how many people were laid off during that time, and they understand the challenges that people found with working at home, and they know how many people found other options during that time instead of working. Perhaps they volunteered, for example. So those hiring managers may not immediately view a gap as an issue, especially in areas where the number of qualified applicants is fewer than the number of job openings. They're willing to consider people with gaps and to hear more about their experience. But, and often in this conversation, I will say but or however, and that's because there's a lot of variables in here. So, but when applicants are plentiful, they have a different attitude towards those gaps. So if they have more applicants than jobs, they're going to view those gaps differently. But we're going to talk about how to address it so they see what the value is of that gap. So because of that, you need to know how to answer the questions that come up about your gap, both in your resume and in an interview. We'll talk more about that later in detail. But again, why are we talking about this? For many, that thought of re-entering the workforce after a break, especially a long break, can really just be daunting. Things may have changed since you were gone. You may not be happy about having to be in an office at specific times. You may not be confident in your own skills or about getting back in and working with a team again. So it can be viewed as a big task, a big hurdle to overcome to get back and return to the workforce. Women, especially, have a harder time re-entering the workforce than men do. And there are probably multiple reasons for that, but in general, this may have to do with the level of confidence. There are many studies out there that show that women tend to underrate or understate their capabilities and qualifications in the best of times, even without a gap, whereas men tend to overstate their qualifications, and this would be impacted. This would could be impact. It could impact who ends up getting hired, but it also could be impacted by the length of a gap. It could make that lack of confidence that women have, the understating, become even more prominent. Hiring managers also sometimes have preconceived notions, especially related to women returning from handling family matters or family issues or a maternity leave. The hiring managers may think the women will only be partially engaged while they're at work or that they will need extra time off to care for others. So we're also talking about this because preparation is the key, as I stated up front, and attending this talk for some of you may be your first step towards preparing. Hopefully, for those of you who have already done some preparation, you'll find some valuable suggestions and guidance in this presentation. So, and finally here, I am a firm believer that all of us need to be sharing our stories with each other. Many of us have been through this before. This is just one type of story that we can share. There's many others, and someone's going to learn something from the stories you tell. They're going to hear it, they'll learn something from it. They may not learn it right away, they may remember it down the road. But you might even find yourself telling the story and inspiring someone to take a career break. They could see your example and know that returning after a break can be done, and may provide them with even more skills and experiences that can add value to their work. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda. We're going to start out talking about what the problem is and then how we can address it. This will include details on the key that I said, preparing, finding support, and identifying opportunities. Then we're going to talk about sharing our stories and a summary of what we covered, and then finally the key takeaways. I'll also note that I did a lot of preparation and research for this presentation, and there are several website articles and some videos linked at the end of the presentation that you might find helpful. So let's go ahead and start on the next slide. So first, I want to start out by talking about the problem, which has many names. You'll hear it called a resume gap, a career break that's come about That's the terminology that LinkedIn uses. An employment gap, even a leave of absence, such as maternity, sabbatical, some sort of family care. These are all gaps that in any period of time that shows no work between jobs. That's what we're talking about. Period of time that shows no work between jobs. And most hiring managers do want some sort of an explanation for anything 6 months or higher. Some may have a shorter timeline that they're looking for explanations about. But you want to include the information at a higher level in your resume. Um, some of them, especially for the shorter gaps, will save their questions for the interview rather than looking at it too closely if it's a short gap in your resume. But if you have a gap that's very obvious and it's not mentioned in your resume, some hiring managers may not read the rest of your resume. If you have a short gap and are able to list your employment by years instead of the month that you started, which is often you're able to do that. Depends on whether you're actually entering the information online or you're able to submit something that you created. The shorter gaps won't be so obvious. So, like if you um, left one job in February of the year, didn't start another job until November or December, that may look like a gap if you put it by months. But if you put it by years, it's not as obvious as obvious of a gap. I would suggest, though, that you still mention it during an interview. Talk about the gap, what you learned during that time. And the longer the gap, the more scrutiny it will receive. And so you need to be prepared to be able to address that both on your resume and during an interview. We'll talk about that in detail. And as I mentioned earlier, the COVID pandemic made gaps less of an issue in many cases, but that's how it's happening now. The gaps aren't as big as a concern right now, but as economies become more stable and that labor force gets strong and so there's more applicants than jobs, those gaps will and can and will become a bigger issue. One of the main problems with gaps is they often lead to a lack of self-confidence, making it harder to just even decide about returning and finding something you think you can do. And we all know self-confidence is very essential during an interview. That interviewer wants to see that you believe in yourself. While I mentioned that the impact of a gap can change based on the economy and the number of the applicants for the different jobs, it also changes based on industry because some industries tend to have more gaps than others. But it also can be based on the number of gaps you have. If you have a lot of gaps or why the gap occurred, those all can relate to that gap being taken in a different way or assumed in a different way by the hiring manager. So I'm sure there are other reasons also beyond those. Let's go to the next slide. So there's many reasons for gaps, and some of these can pop up at any time. Some of them ahead of time they're coming. For me personally, and I tell this to those that work for me, family comes first. In all ways, family comes first. If there's an urgent need with respect to your family, that may result in a gap. This includes things like the maternity, paternity leave, like we talked about, maybe a health or a medical issue with you or someone in your family. Maybe it's elder care. Some of those may be short term. You may be able to predict how long they're going to be, but some of them may not. They may have to last longer than you expect, and they may have an impact on your employment. But some may also need to be longer term. You may know that ahead of time. There also are many other types of gaps, and you can see several listed here. For example, education. Perhaps you need to take a couple of years off to devote to a new degree. That's an easier gap to explain than others, and it should be clear on your resume. You should have that under your education section. However, if you took an education leave, an education gap, and then maybe after a year you found, hey, this degree is not what I want, I need to do something else, you still need to be able to explain that gap on your resume and during an interview. Sometimes there are layoffs. Many hiring managers, as I said, are understanding of this because they've gone through many layoffs during COVID, or perhaps they're in a field where layoffs are more common than some other fields. So they're familiar with that. But you need to talk about what you did during that layoff. There are also individuals that retire and then decide, they're bored or they want a new challenge and they decide to go back to work. So again, we just need to be able to explain what these gaps were for at a very high level and what we got out of them. What was the experience gained or the skills gained? But there's other gaps, burnout, just needing a break, especially in high stress positions. Maybe you're feeling an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to start up your own business and then find that it's not all it's cracked up to be or it didn't work out. Some people, like I said, take breaks to spend time volunteering or in a humanitarian activity. And even some cases, it's a break to travel. We see this a lot with, younger people that are just coming out of college. Maybe they felt like they needed to take a break to go travel around the world for a while. But each of these has different challenges that come up from them. And we need to keep in mind, though, that they all offer opportunities for coming back to work with a higher level of maturity, with new experiences, and with new or expanded skills. And we need to be able to express what those are. Next slide, please. So now we're moving into addressing the problems we face when we return to employment after a gap and how that preparation is key. So here you see many, not all definitely, but you see many of the challenges that a gap can bring. And most of these will become a bigger issue the longer the gap is. Perhaps you're not up to date with the latest technologies in your field. I know that in my own gap, even the terminology had changed. The work environment might have changed. And we saw that in COVID. The work environment changed with more people now working remotely. You may have lost contact with your network or your former colleagues. Your resume may be outdated, not only in the content, but also maybe in the style and the language you use. There could be new tools that are used in your field that you aren't familiar with. You may even not have kept up with latest news. This is probably something that's important in some fields and not in others, but just not knowing what are the key buzzwords, what's the new big exciting thing that's happening. If you haven't kept up with some of those things, that can become a challenge. um, but all of these things can start those questions swirling around in your head, those self-doubts. Are my skills out of date? Will the career break be viewed negatively? Am I too old? Am I too busy with kids? Should I go back at all? And all of these can contribute to that low self confidence and doubt about your ability to return in the way that you want to return. But preparation can help you overcome these questions and concerns. So let's now start talking about preparation on the next slide. So first, on these preparation slides, you'll see there are some stars that I have marked beside a few items, and those indicate that there will be a couple of slides coming up right after this that go into those ones in more detail. So how do we address those challenges that a gap can cause? We have to prepare, and the key is to prepare as soon as possible. So let me say that again. You need to begin your preparation as soon as possible. If right now you are intentionally planning a break from work, maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, and then later returning, now is the time to begin planning your return to work. If your break wasn't planned or you planned for it to be a permanent break and then it turned out you really did need to return to work, and that's what it was in my case. You'll hear about that later. You need to start your planning as soon as you think there's even a possibility that you may need to return. So I'm breaking the preparation process into two phases. The first phase is the foundation. And then on a later slide, you'll see the structural framework that contains the more detailed preparation steps. So if you didn't expect to have a gap, or you didn't expect to return to work, you left and you thought it would be a permanent leaving of the work and not returning, then you need to create your return to work plan and a timeline as soon as you know you want to return. And this is going to be something that you will have to refine throughout your preparations as you learn more about yourself and as you learn more about what you're trying to get back and do. But this is what you currently think you might need to do to get ready. So kind of just a basic timeline to start with. And then I'll come back to what goes into the timeline in a minute. But you also need to renew your contacts. Contacts are going to be very important to you. So go out and find new contacts also if you need. Consider joining a professional society or renewing your your activities in a society if you're still a member, and use that to enhance your contacts, and also use that to become more aware of the changes in your field. You also want to start reviewing all of the things you've done during your gap. For each of those items, those things you've done, identify what experiences you gained and what skills you needed or what skills you gained from those activities. It's not an easy thing to do, but we'll talk more about that in a bit, and I'll give you some examples. For those of you that are planning to take a gap, but you know that you will be returning to the workforce, you still need to develop a return to work plan. And as I said, you need to do it even before you leave. You should be doing that now if you're planning a gap in the future. Make sure you are maintaining your contacts even as you go into your gap, especially the colleagues at your current employer if you think you might want to return to work there. But you can use them to help you stay abreast of the changes, both in your field and at your employer. So perhaps at your employer, your managers may have changed. They may have gone through a big reorg. It's good to keep those types of things, keep up with those types of things too. And keeping your society memberships in place and participate in those society meetings if and when you can. Throughout that time of your gap, you need to show that you're still engaged, and you need to maintain a list of things you have done that provide experiences or skills that will help in your work when you return. This is an easier process for you because you know ahead of time. So as you're going through these things, you can start writing them down and creating that list of new experiences and skills. If it's someone who doesn't plan it, they have to go back and think back to what they did and come up with that list. But if you're planning the gap, you can go ahead from the start, and it just makes the whole process easier. But to address the timeline, the first question is to determine what you want to do, because that's going to impact all the parts of the timeline. Think about what kind of job you want. Are you returning to the same type of job, or do you want a different type of position, but in the same company or in the same industry? Are you looking for something that's totally different than what you did before? Or sometimes people come back and they want to pursue different paths simultaneously, like a just in case type thing. So, an example might be if you're hoping for a higher level position than when you left, so you submit some resumes for that. But you'd also be willing to return at the same level if there are some growth opportunities there. And so you might want to submit, two different resumes for different types of jobs. But keep in mind something like that when you're creating your timeline, because you'll need extra time for that. Also, if you do something like that, I do recommend that you pick only one option at a time for each company. Don't apply for two different levels at the same time. I think it's a better look if you're only submitting for one level type of job. But taking this time to assess the type of job that you want to consider helps you also look at what skills or experiences you need that you may have missing. It helps you understand where you might need to reach out to some colleagues that you have, re-engage with ones that you already knew, or perhaps expand your network to colleagues that have experience in other areas. And you make use of some of your contacts to help you do that. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be looking in this field. I don't really have any contacts, related to this. Can you help me find some? So, in some cases, this may eventually lead to you seeking support from a recruiter or a career coach if you need that kind of support. Something that might help you during this process is to write out a draft statement that shows your background and your skills, but also the values, your own values, and how that impacts your job search and your future career. This is something that's not easy to do. It takes some time, but it's also something that you need to refine as you're creating your timeline, as you go through interviews, and throughout the whole process. You need to keep refining that, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. But I wanted to get back to the timeline. For the basic timeline, it's sometimes easier to work from backwards. Start from the date you want to return to work. You may not have a specific date. So you could just start from date X and then count backwards from there to plan out your timeline. You need to estimate how long it takes from interviews to hiring. You can find that information online based on your industry or based on the size of a company. It's easy to find that kind of information. kind of on average, but it's easy to find that information. And you can talk to your network about their experience with what that hiring timeline is like from interview to hiring. Plan on multiple interviews. So create a window for those interviews. And during that during that window interview, you need to also continue searching for positions. So prior to the interviews, you need to schedule a window when you will be submitting resumes and searching for those positions. That's going to continue to overlap the interviews, but you need to be doing that. Aside a time for doing that as a starting point. This may include time needed to search for opportunities using online searches and your network, and time for individualizing your resume for each position or for each company. And depending on how new you are to the field, that search may take longer than if it's something that you have done before. Of course, before submitting your resume, you have to prepare it. So we're still working our way backward. How long do you need to update your resume? Is it years old or is it fairly recent? Are you emphasizing some new different areas that you want to go into? Are you applying for a new field? Are you pursuing two different types of positions? So you need two different types of resumes. And one thing to think about is how are you going to include your gap? These are all things you need to allow time for on your timeline to do while preparing your resume. So we talked backwards kind of through the things, but now looking forward, here's the things your timeline needs to include. Determine what you want to do, identify your skills and your experience that you had during your gap, and how you can fit the time to assess those into your schedule. Create or update your resume. Search for positions, and then refine your baseline resume as you find the positions you want to apply for. Submit your resume after you've updated it, and a cover letter if they want a cover letter and you're submitting, you have a cover letter to submit. It's not always needed, but make sure they are specifically focused on that position and that committee. Then continue your search while you're interviewing or waiting for calls to interview. And throughout the entire process, plan on using your network as much as possible. Now, that sounds like a lot. It can be a lot. If that timeline ends up being longer than what you want or need it to be, you know, you should be considering other ways to make it go more quickly. For example, using a recruiter, that might help in some phases of that. Using a career coach might help in some phases, especially getting your resume ready. Or you could consider temporary work, such as internships, uh, so that while you're doing your search, you can have some work, but also work on your longer term search. On the next two slides, we're going to talk about more in depth about our two start items on this page. So let's go to the next slide. So on the previous slide, I mentioned that you need to review your gap activities and determine what are the experiences and skills that I gained during that time that are relevant to my job search. And I've listed some examples here, but there are many other things you could have learned or experienced. These are just examples. And I'll talk through some of these, like took courses. Maybe you took some courses. It shows initiative and drive to continue learning. It shows that in addition to studying, you're expanding your skill set. You chaired a committee. It shows leadership and management, being able to collaborate. You organized a sale. You have organizational skills. You did personnel recruitment and management, financial management, project management. You attended a professional society meeting. You expanded your network and you enjoyed networking and talking with others about your area. You stayed abreast of the trends. If you traveled, perhaps you now have great experience with diversities. You improved your communication skills. You embraced new experiences and you like doing that. That shows, that it shows the hiring manager that you're interested in new things. Maybe you led a team to repair a damaged facility and you learned skills of organization, program management, delegation. It shows your commitment to service and that you can multitask. Or you taught school kids how to build a robot. That shows patience. It shows that maybe you had to learn how to build a robot yourself. So it shows initiative there and it shows a commitment to service. So all of these things you can turn into the skills and experiences that will help you get your next position. There's other things here. Like I said, this is a very small list. But for example, if you chaired a committee, Perhaps you learned how to have tough conversations or how to resolve conflicts between coworkers on that committee. Or maybe while leading a team to repair a damaged facility. Maybe you also had to do some fundraising or you applied for a grant. Think about each of these things you did and how they translate into skills that you have gained. So you need to be thinking like a marketer or like a recruiter to be able to think through that process and identify all your relevant skills. And don't forget to emphasize the specific skills as you tailor your resume to the specific jobs or companies that you're applying to. Next slide, please. So another highlighted item on that previous slide, the preparation and foundation slide, was about figuring out what you want to do. We talked about doing it for your timeline at a very high level, kind of the basic first pass, what I want to do. This is a more in-depth look at that. It's a good idea to come up with a few sentences about what you want to do, why you can do it, what are your skills and experience, and why it matters to you. This can be one of the good answers that you could give when they ask that question at your interview that they always ask, which is, why are you interested in this position? Or other similar questions to that. But what will really make you stand out is the why it matters portion. Hiring managers, interview teams, they learn a lot more about you when they hear the things that matter to you. They want to hear about more than just your skill set. So before preparing your timeline, I asked you to first think about what you want to do. This is the time to expand on that at a deeper level and think through why you want to go back. And that's even if the main driver is financial. There are other things that are driving you to go back. And what are you looking for from a personal standpoint? What's going to make you happy? What does success mean to you? What's the impact you want to make personally? And what kind of an impact do you want to see your company making? So you can use these types of deeper questions to help a hiring manager or an employer better understand you. And thinking back to the role itself that you want and what skills and experience do you have that fit that role, how does that align with your values and your answers to those deeper questions? Tie that information into the specific company whenever possible. Then create a short statement that will help them see that you are a good fit for the position and for their company, and then write this statement out. It's not easy. It takes thought. It's worth spending time on it. But once you've written it out, try it out on a few people. Practice saying it until it comes out naturally in response to a question. And then you can use it in a cover letter or during an interview. You can fold it into your closing statement at the end of the interview right before you leave. I've got a couple of draft examples here that I just made up. So I'm going to read through these. And these are examples of the types of things that I think you could include in this statement. My years of experience in applying my engineering skills at my past job, and then leading and managing large teams of volunteers over the past few years have together been ideal training for the position of program manager. I'll have the opportunity to build and manage a collaborative team from the start, and I look forward to helping the team members progress toward achieving their own goals. So that statement shows you're interested in building a team, a collaborative team, and you want to help the team members achieve their goals. So you're interested in helping people. During my time at home, I expanded my knowledge to include machine learning. My past experience as a programmer enabled me to build on my passion and expand my knowledge. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with others and supporting a company that is not only a technical leader, but is also addressing the ethical concerns related to machine learning. So I'm going to continue my passion. I'm going to collaborate in supporting a technical leader, this company, that's addressing ethical concerns. And then during my time since my last job, I led a local community sustainability and environmental awareness program. I developed program management skills. I managed people of different backgrounds and skills, and I led the team to complete our goals on time and on budget, all while making an impact in our community. I'm excited about working for a company that focuses on its global impact, and I believe my skill set fits this position. So again, you're showing you're community minded, you're a goal oriented team leader, and you want to make an impact. Hiring managers want to know more about you beyond just your skill set. So it's worth time. It's worth the time and effort that you put into making this statement. Next slide, please. So once you have the foundation of your plan outlined, now you need to work on that structural framework that will get you an invitation to an interview and will make you feel confident when you go to an interview. Again, the start items are going to be addressed in more detail, but we want to start by updating your resume and your LinkedIn profile. A lot of recruiters and hiring managers use LinkedIn right now, but there may be other similar apps or tools that your field or your community use. You need to use what the hiring managers are going to turn to and make sure that your information is current. Also, you could consider a personal website. This is a great way to provide more detail than what's in a resume. And some fields, it's actually expected because they want to see something at a more detailed level. For example, a model-based systems engineer may have their own website that provides some of the diagrams, the descriptions, the flows, the sequence diagrams that they have created in the past to show their, their personal skills in what they need to do on their personal website. They just reference it from their resume, and then the hiring manager can go look at it, providing evidence of their skills. You need to create an elevator pitch. You can take the statement we talked about on the last slide and expand it, or use it as is, depending on the time you have to give an elevator pitch. You may want to turn it into, I know the last few years there's been a turn towards a lean in statement. And this is something, making your statement in a way that makes them lean in, that intrigues the listener and gets them to ask for more information. But you would need to have that kind of a statement ready. You need to do a full assessment of your skills and experience, including all your recent activities during your gap. You should also, when you're doing that, you may identify some gaps. So you should consider taking courses or volunteering if you need to get more experience. You've just assessed your skills and experience. So now you need to put it on your resume, including from your gap. And you need to determine how you're going to do that. Are you going to use a career break section like what LinkedIn uses? Are you going to put it under volunteer activities or other skills? Just find a way to include it so you can take credit for it. You also need to expand and update your network. They can help you in multiple ways, including practicing interviewing. You need to have fans, friends, family, and your network throw questions at you at various times, or have some planned interview practice sessions even. Prepare for the questions about your gap. You are going to get questioned about it. You need to be prepared. You need to be brief. You don't need to go into the details about why you had the gap or exactly what you did. Focus on the skills you gained. You don't need all that level of detail. During your practice interviews, this is going to be key. Ask your questioners, request that they ask you questions about your gap so you can practice those responses. Also, make sure you have researched the companies and the jobs you're interviewing for. This will help you in tailoring your resume and in your interview responses. And companies want to know that you took the time to prepare specifically for them. You need to be confident in yourself. All of this prep will help with that. Know that you have great experience and skills. You want to find a company that is a good fit for you, just as much as they want to find a person that is a good fit for them. Many of us go into our interviews or while we're looking for positions thinking solely about whether they want us, but you need to think about whether you want them. Don't forget to plan out a few questions for them for the end of your interview. And refine your value statement. That's the longer statement that we talked about, thinking through those deep questions. As you go through this process, you'll find out that you need to refine that. You also may want to tweak some of the wording for specific employers or jobs. So now let's go back and look more closely at the 2-star items we have on this slide, on the next slide. Okay, so how do you go about updating your resume and your LinkedIn profile? First thing I would suggest is using online searches for templates for resumes. There are a lot of options out there. What you want to do is just make sure that it stands out, that it looks good and clean, and you want it to be easy for them to find the information that they are looking for. You also need to keep the details above the thumb. And what I mean by that is where somebody holds a piece of paper in front of them, above the thumbs is the main thing that they're going to look at. I know I'm talking about paper, and most resumes aren't on paper anymore, they're on screen, but it's still those key items that are in the top half, maybe even the top third of your resume that's where you need to catch their attention. If you're including volunteer work, maybe unpaid consulting or some leadership roles you've had, or other things you've done during the gap, you need to make sure you're including the skill set or the experiences that you had and developed through those roles. It's also good to address the impact you've had, not just what the role was. For example, don't just say, I led a team of 20 people in running a churchyard sale. Say something like, led a 20 plus member team successfully planning and executing a yard sale benefiting a local homeless shelter. So be more specific and show the impact. Also, you can search for information about application tracking software to learn the best way to word your resume. A lot of hiring managers are now using this to look for keywords. And so you need to go out and look for what the keywords are that you should be trying to incorporate into your resume for your particular industry or for your job. And you also should learn how to best use LinkedIn. LinkedIn can be a great resource for finding jobs in addition to putting yourself out there so others can look at what your skill set are. And there are lots of online videos on training on using LinkedIn. Also, you can use that LinkedIn, the career break feature. Sorry, this last bullet is redundant. So unless you're returning to your former employer and that hiring manager is familiar with you, your resume is your first chance to leave an impression. So keep that in mind while creating it and modifying it and making sure that it leaves a good impression. Next slide, please. So first, more details on the elevator pitch. I already said it can be built off your value statement that we talked about earlier, but it should be 30 to 60 seconds is usually a time, but there may be cases where you need a longer one. So practice different levels of it. Make sure it shares a few key points about what you do, but keep it simple, show your achievements, and probably most importantly, show how you make an impact. Through your elevator pitch, it's not just for when you're in an interview. Make sure you use it with your connections also. Try it out on them, have them help you refine it, but use your elevator pitch to make new connections. For example, if you go to a professional society meeting, use your elevator pitch when you're introducing yourself to someone. You may find some similarities, or they may be interested in what you're doing. It may be totally outside of their scope of what they do, but they may be interested in it. So use it to make those connections and expand your network. Also, you can use it to establish your credibility and to arouse interest. Like I said, it may leave them wanting to hear more. But it can also be part of an answer to an interview question when they say, tell us about yourself. And like I said earlier, you may need a short one and a long one. Practice, practice, practice. So the next thing I want to go into in more detail is interviewing. And it's very important also to practice interviewing, especially if you are someone who gets nervous in interviews or when speaking with people you don't know, or when you're trying to sell yourself. Many people are very uncomfortable trying to sell themselves, but that's really what you're doing. You're trying to sell yourself to that employer. So search online for sample questions in your field or for the type of position you're seeking. It's easy to find sample questions for those interviews. Write out the answers and then review them and update them and then practice saying them out loud. Then take advantage of your network, of your family and friends, and ask them to throw interview questions at you at any time. Um, you may get questions that are totally outside of what you're prepared for. Especially if you ask someone that's vastly different from you, either career-wise or age-wise or where they are in their career. You may get questions that are outside what you're entirely expecting, and that's a good thing. You can practice and be ready for those unexpected questions. I want you to not be afraid, though, to include responses about how much you have prepared and for returning to work, and about the fact that you have researched the company and the position. Both of those things are going to show them that you have drive and commitment. This kind of goes back to what I just said. When finding people to practice interviewing with, look for people with varying career types, different career stages, different genders, different ages. You're going to get different kinds of questions from them. And you may have an interview that is in a group setting with 4 or 5 people interviewing you, and they may all come up with different types of questions for you. So just continue to practice and be prepared. That's the best thing to do for when you're going into an interview is to be prepared. Next slide, please. So building a support team is a great way to get help in multiple areas of preparation. You can look to your friends, your family, your network, including past colleagues, but also don't forget about former college friends. Maybe there's something through your alumni associations where you can make connections, your professional society, or maybe even a career coach. The career coach may be especially helpful at the beginning when you're figuring out what you want to do and what you want to go back to. And they can also help with things like how to frame what you want to do along with the role your values play in driving what you want to do. They can also help you with finding potential contacts and in knowing what to put on your resume related to your career break. Another support team member isn't really a person, but it could be YouTube, something like LinkedIn or IEEE TV, other similar resources. If you find that you have a gap or some experience or skill that you think you need to add to your resume, go out and search for it on these tools, and then you can add that in. There's another spoke that I probably should have included on here, and that's a recruiter. A recruiter may help you find roles that you wouldn't have even thought of, but they can also find ones that you wouldn't have known of. So you may want to use a recruiter. They can also help you understand what employers are looking for with respect to the particular type of position you're seeking. So keep in mind that each of these probably provide a different type of support. So in your plan that you're writing, consider including a list of what your support options are, and for each of those supporters, what you would turn to them for. Next slide, please. So here I've listed a few websites, kind of the most widely known websites that you can use for finding jobs or finding information about jobs. For example, Glassdoor, many of you may be familiar with that. That's a good site to help you understand more about a particular company. Theladders.com is a good site if you're looking for something in management or an executive position. If you want to consider remote work, Flex Jobs is a good place to go. But all of these, or most of them, all the ones that I've been on, let you set search parameters. So you can set a search parameter for remote positions. You can set parameters for, keywords related to the type of job that you're looking for. There's many websites out there. Many companies also have their own websites. Use the search tools. And in fact, it's good to go on and use the search tools a few times to start with, because that may help you quickly eliminate a website. You may say, this is not going to find me the jobs that I'm looking for. Let me try something else. So use those search tools. Also, use your network. If you establish that network up front in the beginning of your preparations, ask them to start keeping an eye out for jobs that might be a good fit for you. Also ask them if they have suggestions for the best places to look to help narrow down your options. You'll have to make sure that they understand your skills and what type of job you're looking for. And same thing's true with a recruiter, because if they don't understand your skills and what job you're looking for, they can't really be the help that you want them to be. If your job search is not panning out as quickly as you wanted it to, consider searching for or even asking in an interview about potential internships. They could be paid, or maybe they're unpaid if you can afford that. Getting your foot in the door of a company may help you turn it into a position after the internship or the temporary work. Prove your worth. Even if that company doesn't hire you, you may get a good reference out of them. But another company will also see that you have evidence of a strong desire to get back to work by going ahead and starting out in that way. Next slide, please. So thinking now about the actual process, now beyond the actual process needed to get a job, there is great value in telling your story. And I'm here particularly talking about the story of your gap or the story of going back to work after your gap. These are the stories that help you make connections with others. They help you find commonalities in your differences. I find it just as interesting to hear about someone doing something that I would never dare to do as it is to hear about someone doing something that I dream of doing someday. So you could be encouraging and inspiring whoever's listening to you. But our stories also help others understand us. If you do work with a career coach or a recruiter, telling them your gap story can help them find better ways to assist you. Telling your own stories also helps each of us remember what we learned, maybe what we gained, and perhaps understand it even on a different level as we hear other people's reactions to our stories. They may have learned something from it beyond what we even thought of. But sharing our stories brings us together. And in telling them, you may influence someone down the road. You never know. Someone down the road may remember your story and something from it and learn from it. So my gap story is not extraordinary. I've heard lots of gap stories. I left work after 10 years of full-time work, and I quit because I was having my first child, and I didn't intend to go back to work. But my path very soon changed after I left because after being employed only for a couple of weeks, um, my former employer called and asked if I would be willing to continue doing some project work that I had been doing. Now, I set very limited parameters, only a few hours a week, only when needed, only at the time of day that I could work. And I really believed that this work would end in less than a year and then I would have not much to do. And that's pretty much what happened. They kept me on the books, and every now and then a project would arise. They'd call me back for a short bit of time. But there were many times over my 12 years where I had years worth of no work. And in fact, right before I decided to return to work full time, I had several years of no work at all. So, because of a change in my life, I found that I needed to return to full time work. As I said, after 12 years of work, very minimal work in my field, I didn't think I was a great candidate. I'd really lost my confidence. The technology had advanced significantly over the 12 years. The terminology had even changed. The work environment had changed. The amount of work and the number of employees at my former employer had changed. Even the type of work they were doing had changed. So I looked into many other options. I'm a mathematician. I looked for jobs that required a mathematician. I even looked into teaching high school math. Um, I had no background at all in teaching, but I researched and found that, okay, with my education experience, I could do it if I also took a couple of teaching classes simultaneously. But as I was talking about with family and friends, they really encouraged me to apply for a full-time position, either back where I had been or probably in addition to that, other places that had similar jobs. And so I did that. I went through some interviews, and then there was a long gap where I heard nothing from anybody. Again, getting discouraged, continuing to submit resumes. But after about 3 months after I'd gone through a few interviews, I got a call from my former employer that they wanted to hire me back, and they actually wanted to hire me into a higher level position than I was expecting. And that higher level position was specifically because of the experience I had gained in my volunteer work during my gap. So a gap can also continue to impact you even after you return to work. I don't have time to talk through that during this session. And I don't see any places that cover that. But I had some impacts after I returned to work. And my volunteer work is what helped me get over those challenges that came up. So that's something for another talk in the future. But it would be interesting to see some long-term statistics about people returning to work after a gap. Next slide, please. So in summary, what we covered, we talked about what's an extended absence and noted that the longer it is, the more effort you need to put into explaining the value of the gap. Why it is, we talked about why it's important to prepare for returning, when to start preparing, the sooner the better, how to prepare, who to seek out for support and assistance, where to go to look for opportunities, and the importance of sharing our stories. But main thing, you need to make sure you build your plan, make sure it is your plan and one that fits your needs and that you're comfortable with. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways, resume gaps are not uncommon and they occur for many reasons. You're not the first and you won't be the last. If you're asked, explain the gap at a high level, focus on what you learned, what you gained, how you developed at that time. Keep them focused on your qualifications. Show that you're a self motivator, you take initiative, and that you continue to grow even during that gap. If your work gap was planned ahead of time, tell them how you prepared ahead of time, even before you left, and that you had a plan in place so that you would be ready to come back to work as soon as you wanted to return. Use the skills and experiences you gained during the gap to get that next job and take the time to prepare. All of this is about preparation and it does take time, but it's well worth the time. Build and use a support team, be persistent in seeking positions, but there's always going to be times when we get discouraged. Turn to your support team to get that support when you need it. Tell your story, and you'll get valuable insights and feedback back from the people that hear it, and you can use it to encourage others, and you can offer to help others. You can pay forward the help you receive during this time. You have a whole support network that's out there helping you. You can be that support for the next person that comes along. So preparation is going to build your confidence. This is most evident in your interviews and most valuable in those interviews, but the whole process becomes easier the sooner you start preparing. Your support team is going to be cheering you on. And I also bet that someone will be watching you, maybe silently. You may not even know they're watching, but they're going to be inspired by what you're doing and they're going to be learning something that they will need in the future. Next slide. So thank you all for joining me today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jonathan to assist with questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. So, folks, we do have time for some questions. I'll just go ahead and we'll address the questions that we received during the stream. Jill, first question from another IEEE member and volunteer, Pei-Jung. Pei-Jung, great to see you. So she asks, any recommendations if the prior experience as well as the education isn't from the U.S.?
I assume that means for finding a job in the U.S. or for
I'm assuming finding a job
okay,
in the U.S. after.
yeah. So I really don't think that is an issue in most cases, but it could be for some companies, especially for smaller companies that maybe aren't aware of the other companies outside of the U.S. or other universities that are outside of the U.S. You may need to come in and first talk with them about that. Talk about your university, where it is, what your curriculum was like, that it compares with the curriculum for another. It's great if you can compare it to a US university. Same with positions, jobs. I don't think the job part is as big of an issue because you're going to be talking about the skills you had to have for that job more than just about the company. But it might be good to talk about the company and what that company's strategy is, or their long-term goals, or what part of that company's activities aligned with what you wanted to do, and how that was a good stepping stone into this new company. So tie it in to what you're wanting to do and be prepared to answer some very, very briefly. I don't think it needs to be a long answer about your university, about, what your degree was like, and about the company in case they do ask questions. But I don't think it would be a big issue. I know, I work for Georgia Tech. We have a lot of international students at Georgia Tech. And the people that get hired out of Georgia Tech, they don't ask about the school as much or where they came from, or, they get hired all over the world. Um, I think that as long as you have the basic skill set and you can talk to what that is, I think you can handle those questions in an interview.
Thanks so much, Jill, and thank you, Pei-Jung, for the question. And before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to address. I think it's really important that people recognize that volunteer, like you mentioned, Jill, earlier in the presentation, volunteer work. There is a huge thing that you can leverage when it comes to resume as well. For Pei-Jung, for example, and maybe many others who volunteer are part of a association, an organization like IEEE. There's huge opportunities, and a lot of that volunteer work can translate to resume experience as well. So
Yeah.
really
Can
appreciate
I
that. I think
can I add to that, Jonathan?
absolutely.
That second part of my story that I was talking about, when I came back from my gap and started working again after a couple of years, it was very obvious that I was not in any succession planning. I was not able to move into a management or a leadership position. I was really kind of stuck where I was. And I used my volunteering roles in IEEE that showed leadership,
Mm,
that showed managing people, to get a managing position. I had to go outside. So GTRI My research institute has different what we call laboratories, which are research focus areas. I had to go outside of my research lab to apply for a different position still at GTRI. And my volunteer work is what helped me get into that higher level leadership position.
That's incredible. That's awesome to hear. This next, it's not a question, but Alex, our audience member Alex says, I'm going for the money and good pay. Very true. Appreciate the honesty. It would be fantastic if companies would accept that as a reason for looking working there. I certainly you get a lot more honest answers that way. Appreciate
Yeah.
the honesty.
Yeah.
Um, Final couple questions that we'll address. Audience member, don't see the name, but I think it's Deborah. Our audience member Deborah asks, how would you handle a disability? I'm assuming a personal disability, and how much information should you provide? And if it has provided you with skills, do you highlight them?
Well, absolutely highlight any skills that's offered you. I mean, patience, for example. A lot of people that have disabilities have developed endless patience. Um, but yes, highlighting those skills. I do think, probably most employers won't ask about disabilities. They may have something that you have to check a box that you have a disability, but I don't think they would spend time questioning it. At least the US employers, I don't think are even allowed to really ask a lot of questions about that. But I always think that, addressing at a high level and say that, my experience with this has made me ideal for this situation because I know how to deal with challenges. I've developed patience. I, spent a lot of time in my schoolwork and have the technical knowledge that I need for this job. Just continue emphasizing, the positive aspects of what you are bringing to the company. Can I go back to the Alex question? Was it Alex?
Absolutely. Yes.
About going I think that even if you are looking for something for higher pay or whatever, you can frame that in a way that is, I'm not getting the advancement opportunities. I'm not elevating in rank or whatever to get the opportunities that allow me to move up and increase my pay that I would like to see at this stage in my career. So I think there are ways you can answer that question, without just directly saying, hey, I just want more money.
For sure, and I feel like you could also turn it in a way where you could negotiate and argue that you know your worth. You think you're worth if you have like a dollar value, number value, you can negotiate that you feel like based on your experience you're worth this much. I'm sure it's harder for people who are returning to work after extended period of time, but like you
Yes.
said, there are ways to spin it in a positive light as opposed to just saying we need more money,
Sure.
which is not false, but yeah. And as for Deborah, thank you for the question. Last couple questions. First one from our audience member Carl. Any advice for job seekers past the age of 60? Very difficult after that point, and hiding your age seems like an inauthentic practice. Very good question.
It's a very good question. And being after 60 myself, I will say that I understand that concern, but I also think it is less of a concern now. I see, and in fact, the person that I report to is well past 60. I think a lot of employers are viewing, the age range of who they employ differently. It's expanded upwards, and also, especially where there's a shortage of workers. There are a lot of people that are turning to retirees to bring them back in because they have the knowledge, they have the experience, they're mature, they have the time that they can devote. So I think it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. But I wouldn't recommend hiding your age. I don't think you have to say how old you are. You just go in and you talk about what your skill set is and that you have time to devote to, to the work that they are trying to hire someone for.
For sure. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Carl, for the great question. Last question from our audience member. If burnout is one of the reasons for the gap, how do you discuss this with a potential employer without the negative stigma associated with it? Also, great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Um, y- that's a hard question, actually. When if I had left because I was stressed or burnt out or whatever, and then I later decided to come out, I don't think I would put it in that way. I would say I got to a stage where I was feeling like I was no longer able to be as productive
Mm,
and I needed to, get out for a while, maybe gain some additional skills, find whether this is really where I wanted to be. and then took the time to do that. And now I came back and here's the additional skill set that I have. But I would dress it more in that way rather than saying I got burned out, I got overstressed. I would say, I just found I was not able to be as productive anymore. I was not being as effective as I used to be. And I needed to figure out why and how I could get beyond that.
For sure. And I feel like you would also maybe discuss the fact that you could argue that you knew what your priorities were, and at the time something else was your priority. And so, I mean, I feel like that kind of shows that you have an understanding of yourself and what you're capable of, and to not push yourself, which is, I think, a very important skill, a learned skill.
That's true. Good point.
All right. So unfortunately, everyone, we are out of time. I know we could go on and on about this, and hope maybe we can in the future as well. Jill as well. Open to coming back with us. But
Sure.
Jill, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing
Thank
your own
you.
personal experience.
Thank you all
Really
very
love
much.
really loved having you today. This is a very important topic, and thank you to our audience for tuning in and for your great questions as well. Before we close things off, just a quick announcement. Um, First off, registration is still open for IEEE-USA's Aerospace and Defense Conference in Huntsville, Alabama this December. Pardon me. This will be a valuable opportunity to meet potential partners from the U.S. federal agencies and learn more about how you can contribute to the Alabama and the Southeast Innovation System. And it's definitely an event that you don't want to miss. Next, a word from our sponsor, the IEEE Member Group Insurance Program powered by AMBA. AMBA excels in offering customized insurance solutions for IEEE members. Whether you need health, life, or disability coverage, AMBA has you covered. Visit the IEEE Member Group Insurance Program website to discover the benefits and options available to you. If you like the content presented in today's webinar, be sure to check out our other ones. We have an entire catalog of presentations available for your viewing pleasure on our IEEE-USA website. And finally, please like and subscribe to our channels and check back daily on our social media for future live stream updates. Have a great day, everyone.
I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE-USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE-USA is more than just a network. It's a family.